morning, good morning, good morning. I thought we would start with just a very quick going within, just closing our eyes and taking a deep breath and just feeling a sense of being here fully. I like to say I call myself back to myself fully. Just take a deep breath and just feel yourself sink in. I always have the image of honey being poured from the top of my head, going over my body and down to my toes, just covering me, grounding me, getting me here fully. And then another deep breath. And we're here. And I'm so grateful that all of you are here in this gorgeous little chapel of the snows with no snow. It's very beautiful, and I'm very grateful to be at Wanderlust. It feels, I'm a city girl, and it just feels so freeing, like an adult summer camp, and it's just very exciting. And it's been very good for me, however brief I've been here. I want to start with a soul talk, what I call soul talk, and then we'll do a soul voice meditation, and then we'll have time for a Q&A. So we're going to have 3 presiding images of the divine feminine today, and the first that I'm going to talk about is the goddess Isis. And I don't know if many of you know about the goddess Isis, but she was a ancient Egyptian goddess who was known for being the protectress of everyone, from aristocrats to slaves to prostitutes. She had sanctuaries that lined the Nile in the millennia before the Common Era. And was in hieroglyphs, she was most often depicted as this woman down on her knee with these huge arms outstretched and these gorgeous golden feathers underneath her. Her priests and priestesses who tended to her temples, they were known as being healers, and they were known that if they had been initiated into the cult of Isis, that they had the powers to restore life and to bring back health. So her story is incredibly gruesome, but captivating. Her lover Osiris, who is also her brother, Swallow, gets murdered, and then his body parts are chopped up and are scattered all over the earth. So what Isis does is she goes out of her ardent love for him, and she hunts down, she scours the whole earth, the whole world, and she finds his missing body parts. And then when she has found them all, she brings him back to life. She resurrects him. Now, my story started when I was 10 years old at the First Unitarian Church of Cleveland. And we were reading from the Old Testament, and I broke out in hives. I had a very strong, visceral reaction to the story that we were reading about Sarah and Hagar. The way that these 2 women were not only dealt with, but how they were dealing with each other disturbed me. But I was 10 years old, and I had a 10-year intellect. So I didn't know how to articulate and really describe why I was so upset. My skin had that covered for me. I was like a hot mess with like the boot of Italy on my face. And so it was clear, all was not well with me. But I didn't know how to say anything. And the parent-teacher man who was conducting the class, asked me for my comments. And I stammered out something like, we don't know what it was like for them, for the women. We're not hearing from their voices directly. We don't know what it was like for them. And, he didn't really know what to do with me and what to say. And I, at that point, was so worked up, I really didn't even know what to say next either. And so I did the single thing I knew how to do best at that age, which was to storm out of the room dramatically. And that's what I did. And then I went and I sat on the curb of the church parking lot, and the anger just roiled and welled up in me until it finally sort of hit this place of a crescendo and a place of knowing that it wasn't anger I was feeling, it was fear. I was terrified. This God, the parent-teacher man was having us read about, had been described as the God of the majority of Muslims, Christians, and Jews for the past, 2 millennium. And according to this view, that meant, I could just see the calculations of all of the numbers of people throughout all time, had always seen the divine as male and only male. And I realized that made me terrified, because then I was the sex that was not considered sacred. I was female. I was not the sex that God was. And this made me afraid to be in the world. The definition of apostasy is to abandon one's faith, to leave your church or to whatever faith tradition you have, and it's to leave. For me that day, it's very hard to describe, but that amount of fear created this sense of needing to leave, of needing to disassociate. And if I could describe that moment to you at all, I would say that the body has a door, and that door is in the heart. And in that moment, I opened the door to my heart and I walked right out of the fear that I was feeling for being female in a world that saw God as only male. And for me, that was the true apostasy, not leaving the Christian tradition, which I did that day, but abandoning my own body. So for the next 10 years, 15 years, I developed an immense capacity to experience fear. I just became somewhat of an expert pro of, I was discussing recently with Nick Ortner, because he knew I had a fear of flying, but he didn't get how extreme. He thought I was kidding when I said that I had run off of airplanes, or that I had lifted up a stewardess like twice my size in order to get off a plane last minute. Extraordinary capacity to allow fear to inhabit me. That's how I experienced a lot of my teenage years and young adulthood. And I entered into both divinity school and then seminary and began to study images of the divine feminine. I really found while I was there that a theologian is much like an archaeologist. An archaeologist digs through all these layers of time and dirt and sediment and to get to the actual object, to get to this lost civilization, to try to understand something more about how we are now as a people. And for me, as a theologian, I was digging through all of this scripture. I wanted the real truth, the actual bone, and not some edited version of it. I was digging for the truth, and then I realized I was digging for the missing pieces of her body. I was there to find the goddess, to find where she had been buried, because her body had been scattered all throughout the world religions and all throughout history. I just had to find her. And that action healed the anger I had, because I remembered the goddess has always had a corner on resurrection. It was up to me to resurrect her. Now I'm going to talk about the Black Madonna, which is an absolutely powerful, powerful image of the divine feminine. It's an iconic representation of the Virgin Mary, but with dark skin. And there are over 500 Black Madonnas that are all throughout Europe and France. And the majority of them date back to the medieval period, if not earlier. Marion Woodman, who's a Jungian, and even Carl Jung himself studied this sort of symbolic representations of the Black Madonna. Like, why are they still venerated, and why, in some cases, are they venerated even more than the white Virgin Marys in certain cathedrals throughout Europe? And Marion Woodman would say that the Black Madonna is this symbol of the redemption of the body, the redemption of flesh. She is this suggestion that the goal is an illuminated intersection of sexuality and spirituality, that's our goal in being spiritual, is to combine, to find a way to combine the both, to combine the both, and to see the body then as a chalice of spirit, not as something that's an obstacle or that's sinful or that's, just dead matter, but to see the body as a chalice of spirit. So for me, I was captivated by her. I went to 2 pilgrimages, one before going to divinity school and then one before going to seminary. And on the first one, I was on a group tour, and the second one I went alone. And when I was on the group tour, I was interviewing a lot of the women who worship these Black Madonnas in different places throughout France and Spain. And I asked them, because I would watch some walk in and then just bypass, the white Virgin and just make a beeline for the Black Madonna. And so I would interview some of them in my horrible broken French. Why are you doing this? Why are you, going to the Black Madonna and not can you tell me the difference? And every woman was incredibly emotional, incredibly passionate about this. And they would say, she has been through the fires. She knows my pain. And when I heard that again and again and again, I began to understand, okay, they wanted an image of the divine feminine that didn't just hold the light, but also the dark. That's what they were looking for. And this is what I found in becoming a pilgrim to the Black Madonna. One in particular I went to on that first trip was in Barcelona, north of Barcelona, Spain. I almost had the TH there from the Barcelona. In this beautiful, beautiful cathedral that's built into the mountains. It's stunning, and that's where the Black Madonna of Montserrat resides. And after the tour group had gone in and seen her, she was in a glass box and she was really, really removed. And I felt something, but not really. So I just kind of wanted to get in my body and go for a hike. And so I hiked up, into the mountains to find, I'd heard that there was a hermitage, and a friend went with me from the group. So I got to this hermitage, and it was stunning. It was this old structure, just absolutely gorgeous. And I felt like I could feel all of the monks who had just sat there, in that crazy singularity of just them and the divine, them and the divine. It just was radiating. And I went in, and of course it was locked. I was so disappointed. And so I'm standing at the locked door of it, craning in, trying to get a look to see what it would be like. And here I am, 25 years old, and this would be my dream house. This was my dream house at that time. There was a mattress, a chair, a candle, and there were thick beams of light breaking in through the roof. And I was oh, this is all I wanted. I just wanted to be able to have somebody support me, bring me some food every once in a while on a little metal dish, that's fine, and just stay there and be with the divine. And the reason for this was because at that time, I had this very odd and unpredictable proclivity to fall to my knees. And I wasn't because I had left the Christian church, and I was raised by a very, very secular family, and so they never knew what to do with it, and I didn't know how to understand it, but I would fall to my knees, and I would be filled with a love that was just all-encompassing. It was everything. It was unrelenting. It just filled me completely. And the description I've always tried to describe it as is that honey would like seep out from my bones and into my bloodstream. And for me, that was the divine. That was the divine. But I didn't have a community to sort of say, hey, does this happen to you too? Like, are you ever trying to, pick out like an awesome outfit and suddenly you're on your knees? And then you have to explain yourself later, like to the cash registers. I didn't have anyone. I was so epically alone at the time. And I wanted so desperately, can I become a nun? Can I? That feeling. And it was like there was something in me that was so solid and knowing and real. And it said, my path cannot separate my body from the divine in any way. My path is to be as at home in my soul as I am in my skin. That's my path. And even though at the time it made me feel like I was just sentenced to be alone then, this freelance mystic, this total aberration, I had to because it was my truth. It was what I knew. And so I came back from that pilgrimage, and China, the woman who was with me, had taken a picture when I was like, trying to break into the hermitage. And when I saw the picture, it was like one of those moments, like where someone slapped on the forehead and you're like, oh. On the front of the hermitage door, someone, and I didn't see it when I was there at the time, but someone had scratched in the letters G-O-D right beside my body. And for me, what that meant was that the divine was locked out just as I was. The divine was on the same side of the locked door that I was. That I am meant to come down from the mountain. I'm not meant to be in the hermitage high in the hill, falling to my knees all alone, just me and the divine. I'm meant to come down from the mountain, to be in the middle of the street and be saintly, to be mystical in aisle 3 at the grocery store. That's what this is about, integrating how we've understood to be sacred and mundane, just bringing it all together, especially what has been locked out of sacred, holy terrain, which is the body. Now, when I went on to divinity school after that pilgrimage, I came across all of this literature, both through mystics and also through poets, poets like Rilke, and then spiritual writers like Rumi, and mystics like St. Teresa of Avila. And they referred to God, not as God like male, but the main way that they referred to God in their mystical writings was as the beloved. And I was like, that moment in Shrek when Fiona's lifted up and like all the rays of light shoot out her arms and her legs? That's what I felt like. I was like, oh my God, of course. Like I can understand, I can direct that, I can own that, and not think myself a freak, but really try to understand that this is my experience and my understanding of the divine, is this intimate, personal, physical reality. And so I'd been writing, journal writing from like, I don't know, 9, 7, whatever, but it was always like, and Bobby did this, and it was always like this little internal critic and like sort of my own bedside psychologist, and going over this and that, and I was still doing that by the time I was in divinity school. But I had this idea, instead of just writing these entries and going over, because I sort of thought to myself, who am I writing to? I'm not going to read this. This is so boring. I'm not going to go back over it. I've tried to read entries from the past, and I've thought they're entertaining. They're not. They're boring. So I sort of thought, like, what am I doing here? Because I love this practice is important, but what am I doing? Who is this to? And I took the inspiration from all of these, mystical writers, calling the divine, the beloved, and I sort of said, hey, I'm going to start writing each of these entries as if I am writing to the beloved, to my beloved. And as the process kept going, I started understanding who I'm writing to is that sensation I would feel when I fell on my knees. I'm writing to that. I don't know what it is. I don't even really necessarily know where it's going to lead me, but I know that to me is the divine, that sensation. And so I started writing these love letters. I switched from black ink to red, and I was writing out these letters, and sure enough, right before graduation from divinity school, I got a response. I know that sounds really this is the moment in this talk when you're going to check out, she got a response. Oh shit, I was with her up until that point. But let me explain. So I don't know if any of you have ever, I imagine a lot of you have journaled before, and sometimes you get in that space because most of what we're writing is so boring. We kind of get into this almost like la-la, like this a shift of consciousness, an openness, a spaciousness. And in that space, every once in a while, I would hear a voice come through me that was so fiery, was so ancient, and loving feeling. There was no judgment. There was a lot of humor, but there was it was so powerful. And I knew it was the voice of my soul. I knew that this was the voice of my soul. So I started continuing to do this process, and what I came to through this process was that instead of going back I was working for pregnant teens before going to divinity school, and I had every intention of returning, and so did everybody else who knew me. And instead, I was like, oh, I'm going to go back on a pilgrimage to the Black Madonna and Mary Magdalene, and the voice in my journal told me to do so. And that did not fly over well for anyone. I heard left and right, both within me and outside of me, voices telling me that you're crazy, you're a woman, that's unsafe, you don't know what you're doing, you're deviating from your path. Your path is supposed to be of service. Why would you go and do something so selfish? These are the voices I met with, and they were fierce. I mean, they were coming at me left and right. So this is when I really understood the truth of the practice. Like, here was the real practice right here. What was I going to do? Was I going to follow those other voices saying, oh no, you got to make meaning out of your life. You've got to go back to work, and you can't just follow some voice, in your journal. And I came to this place where I really understood that I had to own my truth, that my truth was mine, that no one else was ever going to do that for me. I had to choose the movements, the steps, the actions I was going to take in my life. No one else was going to do that for me. And this voice that I was meeting with, this voice of my soul, I knew that it was the voice of love. And I knew that that's what I wanted my life to become. I didn't know what was going to happen. It's like walking off a cliff. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to move the way love wanted me to move. And I knew that this was my way. Just continue to meet with this voice in the journal. So I did. I went on that pilgrimage, and I came back, and I deepened this connection to this voice that I was hearing within me, a voice I call now my soul voice. And it doesn't now have to happen through the journal writing. That was almost like, it was like training wheels, to getting to the voice of the truth inside me. Now I can hear that voice whether I am, on the elliptical machine at Equinox or riding on a train. It doesn't matter. I can drop in and I can hear that voice and I can know it. I can distinguish it from all those other voices that might seek to derail me. So after I finished my degree and moved back into the world, a third goddess sort of came into my life that was really powerful and spoke to me, and her name is Green Tara. And the Tibetan Green Tara has an amazing story. I love her story. So the bodhisattva of compassion, a bodhisattva is a being who has vowed to come back for all lifetimes until all beings are enlightened. Like, they could totally just go check into nirvana right now, but instead they make this vow that they're going to come back again and again. So Avalokiteshvara, who is the bodhisattva of compassion, is standing on this red hill, and he's just, devastated by all of the death and the carnage beneath him, and he starts to cry. And from out of his tear comes the Tibetan goddess Green Tara. And so that action, she is the embodiment of compassion. She is compassion in action. That's how I understand Green Tara. And she has this awesome, I really, like, if I could high five her some way, I totally would. But she was basically talking with a bunch of other bodhisattvas, and she was in a male incarnation at the time. And, they're all having this discussion and about incarnations and, being able to become enlightened. And Tara says, one of them says some sort of misogynist something, like that you can't become enlightened in a woman's body. And Tara was like, what? Where's that written? Like, who says? Why would we not be able to become enlightened in a woman's body? And right then, on that day, she made a vow that she will always incarnate as a female until all beings have been enlightened from the misunderstanding that you need a male body in order to become enlightened. So I just feel like, soul fist pump to her. It's like such an awesome vow. She's totally, but what she really embodied for me was this sense of like, it's moving and it's empowering and it's renewing, it's resurrecting to be able to connect to this source of love that's within us. But then what do we do with it? How do we move it forward out into the world? And for me, after I could begin to hear it through really know the difference between my voice, my soul voice, and the voice of doubt or fear or worry, once I really began to discern that, I started really moving forward in terms of knowing what it was that I had to do in the world. And I created a women's spirituality organization that I call the Red Ladies that really helped. Initially, we really came together because of how hard it is to hear the truth. Like, what really is the truth? Because so often we delude ourselves, oh yeah, this is my truth. It is. It is. And it's like, unless you have a group of women who are around you, reflecting back the truth you asked them to hold for you, oh my gosh. It's just, you'll get there, but it's just going to take a lot more jobs, relationships, trips to, bikini-clad lands, and I found that if, the most expedient route is to be able to have a group of women who are holding that truth with you and reflecting that truth to you so you can really practice and really get, hone in on what exactly is your soul telling you. Then the Red Ladies grew to an event called Reveal, and it's a community of women who are interested in their own spiritual empowerment, interested in being able to hear this truth of the voice inside them rather than following what everybody else wants us to be, which we always get an earful of, and to really claim our bodies as sacred, and then to also really find our work in the world, what I would call soul work, really find out what that is and be able to move into it. So for me, that could only happen once I really had that community reflecting that with me. So for me, what I came to at the end of my sort of journey was that, you know, being spiritual wasn't something I needed to learn, like to put on, to add on, to, you know, figure out. Being spiritual was just remembering who I am. Being spiritual is just a process of being able to claim the love that I am and know that I am in my core and simply be it, nothing more. I call this process getting spiritually naked, and describe the 7 veils that can lift so that we can just be the raw love that we are. And how I want to close is to talk about, where are we on time? We're good? So I want to go into a little bit. One of the things that comes up so often in Red Ladies around the soul voice is, you know, I thought I had a sense of my soul voice, and I was following it, and God, I think it's the voice of my fear, you know, like how do I know? And this is a great one. This happens often. It's like I'm following the voice of my soul, but it's really hard, and it's asking me to do stuff like, you know, change jobs, like question my relationship, and, you know, how do I know? And I'm like, okay, see, that's when the fire comes in. That's when the real transformation and the grit, you know, comes in. If you want to listen to the voice of your soul, you're going to bet you're going to have to go through a sort of refinement period, sort of walking through the flames, you know, like a lot of spiritual people I've seen, you know, and they walk across the coals and all that stuff. I'm like, I got that every day, you know, I've got that every day. I know that, but I don't need to do that walk back. I can just, like, the stress and the pressure of being able to get to that place of knowing to my bone that I am doing what it is I am here to do. Because we have very little time. We don't want to do what someone else wants us to do. We want to do what we are here to do. And so how do we figure that out? Now, one of the things I mentioned as I was talking is that I really started with you know, transforming my journal writing practice, and that really worked for me. That really helped for me. And for some of the Red Ladies, that really works for them to have, you know, so use black ink or whatever for like the ego voice or whatever, and then have another color, whatever color represents your soul. Mine's red. But if there's another color, purple, whatever, but just have it be a different color so it sort of stands out in a certain way. And you can practice in this way because it will change your life. Or for some of you, it might be, you know, you may be in places where you meditate really frequently. And if you are a very frequent meditator, then you may know what I'm referring to when I say soul voice. You may already have that. So then how do you refine that even further? And for some women in my spirituality group, they don't identify when I use the word voice, you know, when I say voice, because it's not auditory for them. They're like, what do you mean? Do you hear like, thou shalt not? I'm like, no, it's the same voice that says like, I could really use some peanut butter, you know, or I could, you know, it's in that, it's so unassuming, it is so faint, at least mine is. The voice of what I would call the ego, which there's no ego bashing here. It's just to distinguish, you know, which voices we want to follow within our minds. But the voice of the ego for me is so loud. I mean, imagine a voice with like a megaphone and then right up against my face, like, you must do this, or, and there's like, there's always like do or dares, there's always like deadlines, there's all these limits, like, oh my God, if this doesn't happen, then, and that's not my soul. That's not my soul talking, and I know it. And I can get all caught up in it, or I can choose to not get caught up in it and identify it as something that I just want nothing to do with, and then listen for a deeper truth. But it's an art. It's a sacred art of really being able to get that spiritually naked, to just hear that truth of who you are. So what I would like us to do is to just go into a soul voice meditation, and then after that we'll have time for questions and comments. But I want to lead you in a soul voice meditation, and you're going to notice that I have very, very little directions. And the reason for that is I inherently trust that you are a spiritual being. You know how to connect to what is true within you. I know you do. So, but all we need sometimes are the right conditions to sort of incite that connection. So let's just get still, and as we did when we first started, let's just close our eyes and take a couple deep breaths. Just allow everything I've said to just fall out your ears. And just come home to your body. Come home to your breath. And now all we're wanting is what I call a flirtation. Like what image, what word, what sensation might represent your soul? And hearing your soul can come in a lot of ways. It can come in a vision, a quick little flash of something, a memory of when you were fully embodied and unafraid. Maybe that's a little Polaroid your soul just sent to you. And your soul may speak through a sensation. You may just feel calm, or you may feel some love well up from within you. Or if you're like me, you may hear a certain cadence, a few words that you know are your soul's, because in the wake of those words, you feel free. No matter what those words are, you're left feeling free. Okay, we can begin to take a deep breath and come back, and as we do, send gratitude for anything your soul has sent you, even if it's very confusing. This is just a first date, and those can be very awkward. And really, the practice is just that. It's just making time, something that simple, just making time at some point in your life, even if, I'm a single mother, and so spirituality is not something that I set aside. It's something that I do while I'm doing the dishes, while I'm changing a diaper, while I'm finally having time to take a shower. Connecting with the voice of my soul doesn't have to happen in some precious, excluded side place. It happens every day, all the time, in the world all the time, and it deepens. And my vow is just continuing to be spiritual in this way, to make my life about that union between me and my soul voice. What I'd love to do now is if anybody has any comments to share about their meditation and or any questions that have come out because of it, I would love to have how much time? Great, that's perfect. about 10 minutes for any questions that somebody might have, or you can ask me about anything I talked about.
Thank you for that. My question is, how do we find or initiate a women's spiritual community for ourselves?
Excellent question. That is such an excellent question. So for me, it started incredibly slow and small. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. And only you really know that certain particular, it's really hard to describe, but it's like when you get the goose flesh, when you it's like this intuitive knowing that I can't articulate. It's something that the body aveers for you. So you can start with one woman in your life. If you have one yaya, one someone who has always got your back. Because that's the quality of the kind of women that you want. So, I know in traditional Judaism it takes 10 to have a minyan. It only takes 2 to hear the divine from within you. It only takes 2. So if you can even just find one woman who you can begin to have this practice of just spending some time, and you guys can be anywhere. You can meet in your house or you can meet at a restaurant. It doesn't matter. What it is setting that sacred space that's around you as you speak and knowing there is no judgment. It's just fierce love for you each to hold each other to your highest truth. And so it might start like that. Mine started with 1, and then it built to 5, and then when I came to New York, it was 50, we couldn't fit in my living room anymore. So it just, and there was no marketing involved, it was through word of mouth. It was like the women who were meant to find this group found it, and we knew the second they were there why. And we've never really had to have an issue of turning people away or any of that kind of stuff. It just sort of organically worked in that way. And, in terms of facilitating, if your group does grow, you just hold that space of love being present, that love is present. And the magic happens because women know such wisdom, and it's like you put us all together and magic is going to happen. I mean, it's just guaranteed. You drop one of those sea monkeys in water, boom. It's done deal. It's what's going to happen. Profound wisdom is going to be shared. I mean, there are times when I'm sharing things that I don't even know what I'm saying, and I'm saying it and it helps this woman. I don't feel like it was me. I feel like it was the power and the energy of the group, of the love of us. Just as prayer is deepened when we all pray together, our yoga practices are deepened when we practice together, so too with, a group of women. It's like the wisdom and that power, that resonance comes through with, it's just grace, and it's gorgeous. So just start with one. Start with one. Thank you for that question.
I have, I guess, a comment to share and a question.
Great.
Part of what I've been amazed by, I have a daughter who's 8 now, and she noticed when I started going to women's retreats, and I found them through the Unitarian Universalist group in my region. There was a time when I had been through several traumatic incidents in the same year. I went to my women's retreat, and my 6-year-old daughter, when I got home, she took me by the shoulders and looked me in the eye and said, "Mama, you are life." And it was like she was just getting something from me that I had gotten from the group. And I said, "Thanks, you too, sweetie." But it felt, later on, I really thought about it. It felt so profound. And I happen to be a psychologist. And I find as I've gone along, I'm more drawn to psychologists whose theories are influenced by Buddhism. And I've recently been to a Tara Brach conference, and I wondered if you know about the work of Richard Schwartz, who's a psychologist who talks about deep self and parts of self, and whether you have any thoughts about it. That might just not be your thing, but I was curious.
Only is that what's called the parts theory?
Internal family systems theory.
Internal families. That's not that energetic work, the family constellation.
It's
somewhat like that.
It has to do with looking at self as a as a multiple system,
Right.
as if it's an internal family with parts
Right.
that are exiled and parts that are firefighters.
Right.
And so it has a lot of overlap with, what you're sharing, and I find myself using that way of thinking more with clients. So I'm fascinated when I hear overlap going on in the world.
Yeah, well, I do feel, especially with the Black Madonna, that work, that divine feminine work, is about reclaiming lost parts of ourselves, really lost parts of our soul, that can happen through trauma. And these women who were going to her versus the White Madonna, the stories they were sharing with me were either of miscarriage or rape or abuse or, something. They had lost something of themselves. And the Black Madonna was about reclaiming and bringing those parts back, trying to integrate them again. And then, from my work, once I felt like I went through that and did that and was able to call back, lost parts of myself that I feel like maybe happened through the, that moment of trauma is fear, and then there's this disassociation, and then this inability to be embodied. And if we're not embodied, we can't hear the voice of our own truth. We can't connect and hear our soul because we're splintered, we're disembodied, and that's when we get lost and often follow voices that, the voice of our mother or our brother or, our church, which not that that's wrong, but just that root voice isn't within us. It's still a power that's outside of us, which is so disempowering, And for those of us who are interested in it, there's something that comes from leading from a voice that we hear within, and that's the voice we can never betray. Not an authority outside of us, not a mother, a brother. It doesn't matter. That is our primary relationship to that voice because we know that that's us, like our essence, the truth of who we are. And I think in terms of the parts theory, sometimes what it is that, at least for me, what we experience in Red Ladies is that they really begin to hear those parts being vocalized. They really hear, oh my God, I'm in this relationship and I realize my mom put me here. It was my mom's voice I followed. It wasn't mine. And they feel betrayed by their mom, and then they get to a deeper layer of it and they realize they simply betrayed themselves. So I think that's how I can understand it. And I think that the goal is always just to be getting down to that singular. Psychologically, does that make sense to you when I say soul voice?
Yes,
Okay.
it does make sense.
Okay.
Yes, and I think in psychology, we're a little afraid to talk about the soul because we're not
No, I
spirit
know.
experts.
I know.
But it's the same thing. I use words like deep self when I'm in the
Right.
psychologist role. But
Right.
Thank you for articulating that. I feel it's a broadening of some of the theories that I'm aware of. Thank you.
Great.
That was amazing, Meg. So you know what my topic is, which is money. And I'm just curious, I can ask you this later, but I think it would help the group. How do you integrate your soul voice with running a business and your financial life? And does it come into play? And how do you do that dance?
Thank you for that. That's such a grounded, wise. Yeah, there's a veil that I refer to as divine worth, and this veil is so important for women because so often there's a unconscious sort of sidling with this idea that if we are going to be spiritual beings, well, then we're going to be, making mud huts in some other country and teaching English as a second language, and we're going to be absolutely dirt poor, And the trouble with that is that that's not necessarily what we're here to do right now. What we're here to do is to follow what that voice is leading us to do. If that voice leads us to a place where we have financial abundance, which I don't have an example where it doesn't. And when I say financial abundance, it has to be really clear that I'm not talking about like, bling, 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 bling. Like, that's the end goal, or that's the reality of everybody who's going to listen to the voice of their soul. What I'm talking about is more getting to a place where you understand, okay, so your divine worth, you are being and doing what it is here for you to do in the world. That gives you an inherent sense of self-worth, of confidence. It's like you're walking around with a huge nugget of gold all day. You radiate that because your gifts are being shared. And for me, that is the definition of happiness. The definition of happiness is being able to share, to give away every gift of love we possess. If any of you have ever experienced this, you know what I mean. That is bliss. That is bliss. And it's concrete. It doesn't go away. It's very sturdy. So we're here to find something by following that soul voice that creates that sense of first inner abundance, right? So our sense of self-worth, something I deeply, deeply had to heal, especially going through, divinity school and divinity school and seminary, because there was so much of this emphasis of, siding with the poor. And, but what I found was that I was depreciating the work of the divine feminine in the world by doing that. I was saying, oh, my work, because I work speaking about the divine feminine and, gathering circles and making these events and writing on the divine feminine, I don't need to be paid, or that depreciates, that's arrogant of me to label that worth beneath anything else. This is, to me, I have to hold this as divine work, and it has divine worth in the world. Because it is what I am here to do. It is my vocation. It is my calling, and I have to own that. So I think, it's something that's kind of cracking open. Like I feel like there are a lot of people, especially, over the past 10 years in the shadow of 9/11, and like with the recession, people, women especially, are, making it work for themselves in terms of alternative jobs, like going online, like creating, becoming fempreneurs. I say this generation's Rosie the Riveter is an entrepreneur. I mean, it's really like and there's something so powerful about claiming work that works for us, like work that, and the internet is a very feminine mode of communication. And so it's like we are finding ways to add worth, material worth, to what before had always been silenced, considered less than, beneath, and had never been financially supported. So for me, it's a holy assignment for me to get paid for doing this work. One more question? Great.
You really moved my heart. It was so powerful. Soul searching is, so I think with her experience as a psychologist, I'm similar professionally. I'm in neuropsychiatry, and I blended spirituality, sexuality, and this mindfulness in one way. I think from the very beginning, I don't mind sharing, I was born in a religious, more that kind of male-dominated, which I rejected from the day one, and I felt like my whole body and my mind was not what I wanted to be. I think this feminism doesn't have to have a gender. This feminism doesn't have to have a label.
Right.
Feminism was with me from the very beginning, and I didn't relate with this male godness. So, and I was really appreciated that, and I was lucky, actually. I was raised with my mom, and very much female-dominated world. And part of the India, where I was at that time, was mostly Hinduism, which is a feminine goddess and divine goddess. Mm-hmm. And one of the goddess was Saraswati, Saraswati is a goddess of education. I drawn to her without knowing any religious background. I was not even understanding what I was doing. But I just felt so touched and so connected. And since then, I think the question is, who am I or who am I? It doesn't have to have a label. You know, we create the label. We say the pink is for girl, blue is it's for business, because they make money for that. They make money because that's how they survive business. Nobody told us. Nobody. You go to different culture. They don't know anything about that. So it's all man-made culture. You know, the whole world is man-made culture. So I think this powerful spirituality, and when we're in yoga practice, and as a professional, I can say, it's so powerful to blend together, because, you know, if we don't understand our soul, if we don't understand who we are, and I'm still struggling because it starts with the anger and so much sadness and frustration that it's so hard to deal with the real world when you're not accepting what the real world is. So it's a very incongruous kind of way. It is hard, but at least it's positive in a way that you are reflecting your own soul, and doesn't matter what every world or whatever everybody practice.
Right.
So I think it's so powerful. I just wanted to share. And then the last comment, I am a yoga practitioner, and the reason I became a yoga practitioner to blend this in my own practice in neurology, which is, how do I use it for my own patient, yoga? Because yoga, if you look at the yoga spirituality, one of the pillars was the Kundalini goddess, which is Shiva and Shakti. And no matter what we say, nobody is a gender-wise man or a female. It's a Shiva and a Shakti. It's a combination of energy that blend up together. We keep changing that.
Right.
So I think it's a way, I'm so powered, I'm so touched by your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That, just for that comment, I you know, that image of Shiva Shakti, of Kali and Siva, you know, I think it's really important to sort of hold that image and understand that it's not that men are meant to be Shiva and women are meant to be Kali. It's that we are each, all of us, meant to hold the energies of both of them and become one. So we are each masculine and feminine, holding that and becoming one from within, and that's that power of that integration and that becoming one, and then really moving from, which sheds all complexity. I mean, it's really, really simple when you get down to it, because if you listen to that voice from within you and nothing else, I mean, you've got like this. You know, I just had that image of like the coal miners, like they wear those like headband things on there with a flashlight. That's what it's like. It's just like, beep. You know, you have this light that's going to guide you, and you don't have to worry about the complexities of things. You're just stripped down to what is only you, and moving that love out into the world. So thank you very much for being here this morning.